As does the name imply, fixed positioning places an element at a fixed position within a web page. And as we have seen, that to position an element, we need some reference point. In case of relative positioning, the reference point was the element's default position in the normal document flow. In case of absolute positioning, the reference point was the element's container. And in case of fixed positioning, the reference point is the browser window. Any of the four corners of the browser window can be taken as the reference point, but it is recommended that we stick to the top left corner. To make our understanding and behavior of fixed positioning more intuitive, I want you to remember one fact, and that is, since the element is positioned with reference to the browser window, therefore, it will always stay at the same place. Even if we scroll the page down, the fixed positioned element will not move. Suppose we have a paragraph element which looks like this in its default state. Now let's apply a background color to it. We're using the internal CSS styling for the sake of convenience and applying the background color inside the class named fixed. Let's give our paragraph a background color of red. Background color red. Save it and load into the browser, and we see that it's behaving as any block level element would, that is, occupying the whole width of the browser window. Now let's just set its position value to fixed. Save again and reload into the browser. We see that not only the paragraph immediately below shifts upwards, as if the red paragraph did not exist at all, but also what happens to the red paragraph is that when the position property of fixed is applied to it, its background not only shrinks wraps itself just around the paragraph text, but also it now sort of overlaps the paragraph that is just below it. But you might argue that we have not set any distance from the browser window, and yet the paragraph is not appearing exactly at the top left corner of the browser window. It's a bit to the left and way down at the top left corner. Yes, you're right. But this is happening because of a reason that we are already familiar with, and that reason is the default browser styling. Every element in the browser has some margins and paddings applied to it by default. Now if we set the margins and paddings of the paragraph with the red background to 0, we'll see some improvements regarding its default position. Save it and load into the browser. Now we see that the paragraph has moved a bit upwards as compared to its previous position. Let's compare it to its previous position, and here we see it has moved a bit upwards. But it is still not exactly at the top left corner, and the reason behind this is because the other paragraphs in the browser and the body element itself have margins and paddings applied to them. And if we set the margins and paddings for the entire body element to 0, margin 0, padding 0, and now save it and view in the browser, we see that there's further improvement, but still not exactly the top left corner. Although the paragraph has aligned to the left hand side, but there's still considerable distance between the top of the browser window and the top of paragraph. So now let's set the margins and paddings of the paragraph to 0. Save it and load into the browser. And here we go. Now the paragraph element begins exactly from the top left corner. As an aside, I'd like to mention here that a lot of problems are created because of the default styling applied by the browser. And as we saw here, that although we had not set the values of margins and paddings to 0, the browser was still applying some non-zero values of margins and paddings to all the elements. And you should know that even one extra pixel of margins and paddings can break the entire page layout. Also, the default styling varies from browser to browser, and we don't know what those stylings are. So it's a good idea that we create a CSS file that cancels out all the default styles applied by the browsers and sets them to 0 so that we begin applying our default styling from scratch. And the CSS file that cancels out and resets all the default browser stylings to 0 is universally known as the CSS reset file. In fact, we don't need to create one. There are already many good resources available on the internet, and I'll point you to those when the time comes. Alright, let's turn our attention back towards the fixed positioning and create a distance of 500 pixels from the left side and 300 pixels from the top side. Save it and load into the browser. Alright, now we see that the paragraph has moved to our desired location, and now let's scroll and see the magic. We're moving the page up and down, but nothing is happening to the paragraph. It stays where it is. That is great. And that's it. This is what fixed positioning is. There are many great uses of it, and one of those can be, for example, that we would want our top navigation to be visible at all times, no matter how far the user has scrolled down the page. And there can be many others. Thanks for watching.